Welcome everyone to Chones Party, and today's guest is Plor, one of my favorite people, dearest friends. I we've spent years meeting regularly. I've learned so much from you, and just really grateful that you're here. I know you don't usually like to do these things, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
So let's just start right. I guess I could give a little context on like where we met, what you do, unless you want to go ahead and do that, just so people know who you are.
Um, I mean, yeah, I guess the rough bit is I've been uh, in, I guess, Ethereum space since about 2017, 2018. Uh, joined Raid Guild, which is where I met Bar Lucid. That was probably like 2021. She was a little bit after me, a couple cohorts later. And then we did some DAO House stuff together, and there's this concept of um, buddies, basically have kind of people that you can chat with about whatever random stuff. And so me and Christina became buddies, and we've been doing that since. And then I joined Chones a year or so ago, and been doing what I can there.
Yeah, and you've always been like the person that it brings useful perspective in its if everybody's just like you're the one who's going to call out the emperor isn't wearing any clothes, which is like really great, especially someone like me who's always like way up in the sky, like just listening to my own thoughts, um, and and also like working on teams and seeing how you lead teams is just like everything makes sense. You if you don't like you go and you figure things out that you need to figure out so that you can make something work. And you're very technical, yeah, it's like all these things that you're really good at have to do with like putting all the pieces together and getting the workflows to create something that's useful. So when I think about like what you're good at, I imagine you like this kind of like digital tinkerer. And I'm wondering if you like did was that like something you noticed about yourself when you were younger? Like did was there something that like captivated you and you had to like figure out how to work like and then you just kind of kept those patterns going? Do you mind going into that?
Yeah, so I'd say I pretty much always had it. Always been a little bit nerdy. I kind of started out. My family had computers around a lot. I think we had like a 386. That's the earliest I remember. It was like a Tandy or something. And so my brother, who kind of a bit older, so I kind of followed a lot of what he was doing. So he like set up the DOS and like stuff. So I would basically jump on the computer when he wasn't around and just explore on it and stuff. And then eventually Windows came around, and so I kind of spent hours digging into that, and then Linux. So basically, I've just always been tinkering with operating systems, I guess, and sort of like trying to figure out what's going on. And then at some point, that shifted into programming, where I could actually like build the stuff and try to come up with ways to like integrate and stuff. So yeah, I'd say a little bit of a jack of all trades. I've never sort of specialized in any one area, but always kind of tinkering to figure out how stuff works and how to make stuff kind of work together. I guess like how to yeah get you know I guess more like in the like networking, like how to get two computers talking to each other or something along those lines.
You're actually really good at that. Like that's like one of I think you're just like I call it like your superpower of just being able to like as things are getting more and more complex or things are like evolving in technical like tech stuff, um, if I don't understand something, you're like, oh, this is how, like, I imagine like this can work like this, and you're like, well, actually, this is what's happening over here, so this is how it would work over there. So making things talk to each other, I think is like your superpower. It's cool. Um, so okay, so you were early fiddling with operating systems, including Linux, and now we're doing a lot of like crypto and DAO stuff. Do you have like a like relationship with what, like, do you value open source? Do you care about open source? Do you have like some like a relationship with maybe the broader open source community? Like, what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I probably take a different view. Like there's definitely different benefits to open source. I think the one to me that I think appeals most is sort of the lack of like control. Like it's not a top down thing; it's more of a bottom up thing. And so, someone who's running an open source project usually gets kind of credibility from the community to do what they want with it. But if they make a mistake, then the community can kind of fork it or do something like that. So I think the kind of the forkability and not being like beholden to some higher power who you're licensing software from or whatever. So part of that is just like frustration with say Windows where they would make a change and you couldn't like opt out of it other than just keeping your old install, which is harder and harder to do. And then other you know random software where it's like, oh, this feature I use all the time now isn't there, and you're kind of stuck with it. Where in open source you could keep the old version alive and keep that feature that you needed, or you know fork and say like, hey, I know there's a bunch of people who like this feature, so now I'm going to have another version. And there's some software that I've used over time where I've moved with the fork from the one version to another. So I think that's probably the main kind of thing. But then obviously there's the sharing of like lots of people working in code together and lots of eyes on the code for kind of security and like making sure it does what it's supposed to do and doesn't have vulnerabilities. And yeah, just kind of the like the I guess the feedback loop of someone can build something and then someone else can use that to build something cooler or different or whatever, and like it kind of everything adds on itself, whereas there's a lot of repeated work and kind of friction when you're trying to do that with closed source or proprietary stuff where you kind of um you don't have that like flexibility of learning, kind of standing on the shoulders of giants, so to speak.
I imagine open source is more fun if you want to tinker.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that's probably not exactly the tinkering I do. Like, I do more like kind of modeling it in my head of what's going on. So I'm not like digging in the source code for like, what the Linux kernel is doing here. Like, eventually, sometimes you have to do that for some stuff, um, but yeah, it's definitely like if you do get to that point of like, hey, how's this working? It's nice to be able to look at the code and actually see like, oh, that's how it's working. Um, so yeah, it definitely is. But yeah, I would say I'm more on the higher level of like using the software to figure it out and kind of model it in my head, rather than like mapping out the code and trying to understand all the pieces of the code. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you went to school for computer science. So was there like something that you thought you were going to work on as you were studying, and are you doing that now, or has there been like a journey in that?
Yeah, I'd definitely say there's a journey. So in computer science, my focus was kind of operating systems and like distributed systems with a kind of a networking bent on the distributed systems. So a lot of that, basically the how to get uh, computers to talk to each other, to agree with each other. I think that's where my interest in crypto came from. Is that's like crypto is one of the like distributed systems kind of like played out of how do you, like in class we like learn the Byzantine generals problem, which is kind of one of the core uh, solutions that like Bitcoin brings to how do you coordinate a bunch of people, and what are the, what are the attack vectors where that consensus breaks down. So kind of that was the space I was in. When I left college, I ended up kind of just doing like back end, like database kind of development, or API for data systems. So did that for a while and kind of jumped around from different things, but eventually found my way to crypto, which I think kind of brought back that a little bit of that distributed systems focus, where it is like how to coordinate a bunch of different computer systems to kind of work together towards a shared goal.
Do you mind answering a technical question for me that I'm curious about?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so is like things like cloud and like Kubernetes, is that have to do with networking and data storage, or is that like different data formats? How does that work?
So yeah, I would say cloud is kind of a form of distributed systems. It's it kind of abstracts it away, so you don't have to think about the physical machines. So you get a lot of times redundancy, so have different machines running in different areas, so that if one goes down, you're still up, and lower latency, so you can have kind of like different regional stuff. And so it's important to kind of think of the like distributed systems problems there, because how do you have two machines that act like they're the same machine basically? So it's that kind of stuff. Which yeah, I kind of worked in that, but yeah, Kubernetes is more about how to kind of orchestrate the like bringing up and down and like scaling of those systems. Um, so it's more the like uh, the the gears that are being turned to make a cloud system work, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's I would say it's less of the like interesting kind of like, I guess, blockchain sort of like consensus sort of stuff, because you're generally it's command and control. Like one node is basically in control of the whole system, and everything kind of talks to that to figure out stuff. But there's definitely interesting things you can do to kind of do like auto scaling systems and stuff like that.
So, like, you had a computer in your office that stored all your data, and then you had servers in different locations that you can access via the cloud, and then you have um, blockchains that are decentralized and on a bunch of different computers all over the place. So, like, it's probably easier just. So, okay, so storing data on a blockchain. Now I'm getting into technical questions. I hope you don't mind. Storing data on a blockchain is more expensive than like on a cloud. But it's always there and it's always accessible.
Yeah, and I would say it's less about being there and accessible. I think there is sort of that bit, but it's more the permission based side of it. So with cloud systems, like there's one person who's like in charge. Like they can bring it up, they can shut it down, they can change the facts if they want. Like they can basically access the right to the database directly without going through the normal uh, application flow. Whereas at least most blockchains, like this is definitely, there's some of the like L2s where the same entity runs all of the validators, so they have a little bit less of the like uh, kind of consensus level stuff. But like it's more about like who can write, and so there's rules on adding to the database. So like blockchain is basically a database. So it's more about that, and like the neutrality of the system, whereas most cloud systems it's like one person's the operator, they're in control of it, and they really may or may not be neutral. Like it's basically they're the counterparty that you have to trust. And so that's what makes blockchain more expensive in that like there's a whole process to writing data. It has to be replicated more than you would in a like a cloud system, and the process of doing it means that your throughput's going to be a lot lower. Like you can only do like Bitcoin is 4 megabytes every 10 minutes roughly, and then other Ethereum and stuff is more, but I don't actually know what the sort of gas limit is these days in Ethereum, but it's been growing, so you can do more data per 12 seconds than say a year ago, but it's still a lot less than like just writing to a uh, like AWS like S3 bucket and just throwing a bunch of data there, which it will do some replication, do some of the fancy cloud stuff for you.
I was going to ask you about your project management, but we'll save that because now we're talking about data. But can you go into like this seems relevant, like related, but can you go into like what got you started in crypto and blockchain and like what attracted you, and then can you go into how you see the tech has evolved so far and like maybe kind of what you think might be in the future?
Yeah. So I'd say kind of where my interest was peaked with crypto is actually a bit from BitTorrent, which is kind of a file sharing peer to peer system, and it's really just like a way to efficiently download files from a bunch of other peers who have it. Kind of started out in like music, kind of Napster. Napster wasn't technically BitTorrent, but close enough. Um, and so like BitTorrent was a system that I was like, this is fascinating. And then when blockchain came around, it felt like it, but it was for like doing money stuff, basically transactions instead of sharing files, but it had the same peer-to-peer elements. So I was just kind of like trying to figure that out. So Ethereum was kind of my entry point into that. So I was like, how does this thing work? So I just started playing with smart contracts and um, like you know throwing money at random like uh, early experiments, basically like the kind of lottery type stuff and random stuff, and just like how does this thing work? Like how are they able to like make sure that like it operates this way or whatever. So kind of went from there and got into DAOs and kind of the like governance stuff fascinates me. I'm a little bit of a political junkie, so some of the like basically the theory can be tested by trying to govern some group, and like where that fails, and the different failure conditions and stuff there is interesting. So I definitely think there's more to explore there. I think the sort of DAOs are dead thing has maybe come to an end, and people might be starting more experiments with it. I think people kind of got disillusioned with DAOs or governance in general, and the kind of sufficiently decentralized team where they pretty much operate the whole product, but make promises that this part's decentralized, so you don't have to worry about it. Kind of irks me a little bit. So I hope we do get to kind of systems without a central authority, kind of who can turn it on, turn it off, do stuff like that, because that isn't really in the spirit of crypto, I'd say, or at least the parts that I am interested in. And yeah, so I think DAOs might be making a comeback. Maybe that's more hopeful than that I think it's actually happening. I don't know, but yeah, I guess what part of crypto do
I don't
you
know
kind of
what's like the most
think is worth?
interesting to like play with. I know like we I know we talk about things and it's like okay, this is a fun little thread to pull and like try like we'll be like lab rats in lab coats. But it might be just like our small group of people sometimes just wanting to fiddle with things. Is there anything you're hoping to play around with?
Um, I think the thing that I guess I would like to play around with. I don't have a particular project or anything that is doing this, but basically more credit based stuff of how to either collateralize other types of things than just like Ethereum or stable coins or whatever, to allow people to have access to on chain credit. Some of that might be reputational or something like that, but I think there's definitely some areas there because I think kind of unlocking some capital will allow people um, to do more. Sort of, if you have an idea, you can either raise capital, and then you have the whole kind of equity problem of like what promises are you making. But if you're just doing simple credit of I'm borrowing, I can do this thing and then I can pay it back. And if I have an idea that is going to yield more than the interest I'm paying, it's worth doing. And so a lot of times it's just people don't have access to that credit because they don't have the assets in the first place. So making more types of collateral that will allow people to borrow against, and then kind of the systems that flow from that of doing. I worked briefly on a factoring startup, which is uh, basically loans against your accounts receivable. And so that type of thing of doing kind of like more like in-depth accounting and then allowing people to say, hey, I have this cash flow, can I borrow against my future cash flow, basically, to allow them to scale up and do stuff. So a lot is boring and sort of just like financial like wonkiness, but I don't know, I find some of that stuff interesting.
Yeah, I was watching the Slow Hunch podcast, and um, someone mentioned like the banker in town that loaned to their parents' small business so that they could do orders. Um, was like they had a relationship with that person. So like this makes sense too. Like if Chones, like we've talked about this, Chones supporting like the network and people in the community so that they could build cool things and figuring out how to do that seems like a fun experiment.
Yeah, I think taking sort of pools of capital or things that are um, kind of unutilized resources and then giving them to people with ideas who can execute on them to basically get profits, and then that kind of helps the whole system. So whether it's investments or loans or however it ends up looking, I think it's like a lot of times what holds people back is that they just don't have the that access to capital to like bootstrap their their thing that they want to work on.
Yeah. Okay, so this is my last question. Um, Unless there's more things you have ideas for. Um, I'm like way up in the sky, and everything on the ground looks like little things that are all related to each other. And so I have these big ideas, and hanging out with you helps me like make things into smaller chunks that actually can like move along a path and at least get started working. So maybe you wouldn't mind going into like how you do project management, like how like what kind of like best practices and why and etc. If you wouldn't mind going into that, it helps me for sure.
Yeah. So I'm a big subscriber to different agile methodologies. So my job out of college, we worked on agile teams there, and so I kind of worked through it and kind of drank the Kool Aid and um, really enjoyed the process there and kind of learned the reasoning behind a lot of it. And so I would say for that sort of like the head in the sky or thinking big, it's really important to bring it down to earth and like what do I do today or today and tomorrow or however you're looking at it for what actually brings value to the user or whatever group you're working on of like how do I get that value now, like bring it closer. And a lot of that is sort of shortening the cycles, the iterations of work. So rather than thinking of an idea that's a year out and then working for a year and then releasing it at that point, and then hoping that it's valuable, you can break it down into a chunk and say, what can I do today that can bring someone value, that someone using this, or the whatever the thing that you're building or working on is, how do I deliver at least some of that value now, and then you just keep building on that. So in what can I do in a week to do that, what can I do in a month, and you kind of break it down in those uh like cycles of development. So rather than thinking about what can I do over the year to give value, I in theory it's the big value, but what Agile lets you do is pivot and move around a little bit to actually discover where the value is, because a lot of times your idea isn't necessarily like perfect from the start, and you need to do some experiments, do some some data gathering of like what do people find valuable, so what can I do to deliver that. And so yeah, it's really about breaking it down into chunks and breaking those chunks into smaller chunks, and then focusing on what's right in front of you, what's under your feet, and do that, and then get feedback from that of like, did this give the value that I expected it to? Like, do people like this new feature, or did this if you're writing blog posts, did this blog post get the response I expected, or whatever. And so a lot of it is sort of experiments, but it's also like really thinking at the small scale of like what do I expect from this thing? What did it deliver? Did I, and really kind of doing retrospectives to like think back of like what worked, what didn't, do more of what worked and less of what didn't, and that sort of stuff. So it's like changing the process, but also um, seeing the artifacts of what are put out and like measuring those of like what value exists from this, like what were people able to do today that they weren't yesterday, sort of thing.
Yeah, it doesn't like feel like it's taking away from the big picture. It's just if I'm way up in the sky all the time, then like the shifts are going to be huge versus like smaller iterative like adjustments that help you still discover what's the right path, or like what works. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the like high level vision of the thing, if you're realizing that it's not going to work, you're oftentimes going to kind of feel, I guess, like the whole thing is for naught, and so you almost start from scratch rather than like make minor changes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you've done something and it's producing value, you can be like, hey, this is a thing that is working. What's the next thing? And that it shifts the high level vision of what you're building or working on. Um, but it morphs it rather than like completely replaces it with a new one. And so you're never like throwing away that high level vision of like, here's my long goal, 1, 2, 3 years in the future. But as you're going along and finding out what works and doesn't, you might be like, oh, that assumption I had is incorrect. Rather than throwing the whole thing out, I can just figure out what the new assumption to make is and then work from there.